A man recently was pulled over by a police officer, and the officer asked if the man knew he was going too fast. And then the man said, "I'm sorry, officer, I had my cruise control on and just forgot about the speed limit and that it had changed." And then there's his wife that's sitting with him over there in the passenger side, and then she says, "Harry, I told you 2 miles ago that you were speeding." And then Harry, at that moment, he gives his wife kind of a dirty look as the police officer then begins to pull out his ticket book. "By the way, sir, did you know that your left rear signal light was broken?" And the police officer asked, to which Harry replies, "Oh, wow, it must have just happened in the mall parking lot that we just left." And then his wife interrupts again, and she comes back with this, "Harry, how can you sit there and lie to that nice police officer? I told you to fix that 3 weeks ago." Well, of course, now Harry is so upset, and he gives yet another nasty look. And then the officer begins to write in the ticket book there. And then the police officer adds, "Oh, I'm also going to have to cite you for not wearing your seatbelt." And then Harry says, I just unbuckled it as you came to the car so I could get my driver's license and my registration and my insurance and everything." And then guess what happened? The wife speaks up again, and she says, "Harry, you know good and well, I tell you all the time that you better buckle up because you never wear your seatbelt." Well, at this point, now having taken all that he could stand, and he turns to his wife and very angrily and rudely says, "Woman, would you please keep your mouth shut?" And so now the officer, he looks at and he addresses the wife and he asks, "Does he verbally abuse you like this often, ma'am?" And then she says, "Oh no, only when he's had one too many drinks." You know, the American journalist and humorist Sam Levinson, he said some interesting words. He says, "It's so simple to be wise. Just think of something stupid to say and then say the opposite of that." And I can relate to that definitely. But so today we are talking about those prayers that God always says yes to. It's a series that we've been doing for a few weeks now. And those prayers where God says yes every single time. And we know that there are times when God says yes, and there are times when God says no, and there are times when God says wait or be patient. But today we consider that next prayer of God, give me wisdom. Amen. And James affirms this. He says that in chapter 1, verse 5, he said, "If any of you lacks wisdom, then he or she should ask God, who gives generously to all, without finding fault, and it will be given to you." That's a promise right there. We just ask God, and then God somehow gives us that wisdom that we so desire. But first of all, what is wisdom? You know, I say that word wisdom, and maybe many different ideas pop into the minds of those who hear this word. Well, recently there was a group of kids that a survey was done, and then they were asked what they thought wisdom was. And here are like 3 or 4 of their responses. For example, Rocky, who was age 9, he says, "Wear a hat when you're feeding seagulls." It's pretty wise kid. Oh, here's another one from Heather. She's age 16. She's pretty wise also. She said, "When your dad is mad and asks you, 'Do I look stupid?' don't answer him." Oh, then here's another one. Joel, age 12, he says, "Don't pick on your sister when she's holding a baseball bat." That's pretty wise. Michael, age 14, says, "Never tell your mom her diet's not working." That's not wise. And probably the wisest of them all, Scott, age 11, he says, never spit when on a roller coaster. So, there's a lot of things that we could say about wisdom, and of course there is the dictionary definition of wisdom, but the only thing about that definition, and let me just share it with you quickly. Webster defines wisdom as the power of judging rightly, following the soundest course of action based on our experience, knowledge, and understanding. It's a pretty good definition. There's only one thing wrong with it, is that it leaves out the divine. It leaves out God. And I truly believe that true wisdom comes from God. I mean, we knew about this even with Job. In Job chapter 12, verse 13, it says, "To God belongs wisdom and power, counsel and understanding are His." And then over in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10, it says that the fear of the Lord, or the respect or the trust of the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. So we see here that knowledge is really kind of just an accumulation of facts. It's having certain ideas within us, but it's not the same thing as wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to use one's knowledge and understanding of God to pursue a wise course of action. So in sum, a truly wise person is one who is skilled at putting into practice the truths and the knowledge and the love of Jesus Christ. What is the most wise thing in every situation? Well, when we ask that question, we've got to be thinking about the example of Jesus Christ. That's truly what makes us wise. I mean, we can have 3 or 4 degrees and yet not be very wise. These children that were just down here, they're just small children. They don't have a whole lot of knowledge yet, but sometimes they can be very, very wise. That's why it's important for us to listen to the children in our lives, because God can speak through them and demonstrate and give us that wisdom. James goes on to talk about in chapter 3, he expands on it a little bit. And he says that, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" He says, "Let him show it by his good life, by deeds in the humility that comes from wisdom." So we see that with wisdom, it's tied together with humility. And then he goes on to say, "But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth." And listen to the contrast that he makes here. He says, "Such wisdom," quote unquote, "does not come down from heaven," but that kind of wisdom is different than God's wisdom, that it's earthly, unspiritual. And James even says that it's of the devil. Then he goes on to say, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice." And he says one more thing about that. But he says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure." Those are his words. "Pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere." So James, in this passage, is kind of spelling it out for us a little bit as to what is the wisdom of God and how do we obtain that wisdom from God. And it seems that, again, there's something that has to happen. We might have a lot of knowledge. We might be listening to the sermon today, and it stays right here. But it doesn't do us any good unless it travels from here into here. And we truly receive the teaching today. I do, you do, we all do. It has to travel from here into here if it's really going to make a difference. And then when it gets here, things start happening. things start changing in our lives. It's then that we truly become more and more wise. So wisdom, it's not so much about what we know, although that is important, as to what we do with it. What we do with what we know. James says that God's wisdom is manifest by living a Christ-like life. And the one who goes about serving and loving and forgiving other people. So once again, let me reiterate what James is saying, that the wise person looks like. This is a person who is peace-loving, considerate of others, submissive, full of mercy, impartial, sincere. And so the question that we are all faced with is, are we living out God's wisdom in our lives? Are we being wise people based on the way that God understands it? I think of in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, it's the story of King Solomon. And he talks about how that King Solomon was one of the wisest men, supposedly, that ever lived. And how he got that wisdom and what God did in response to that. In fact, let's just take a look at one verse here. And it says that in verse 5, God asked, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." So here is God saying to Solomon, okay, you got one shot here. Ask me for what you want, whatever you want me to give to you. And think about that question for a second. How would we answer it if God said, okay, you've got one wish. What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do? Most of us maybe we would think, oh gosh, I would want to be healed. I would want good health, or maybe better financial situation, or maybe there's something else that we're going to use that wish for that one thing. So what would you use it for? What would you use it for? Well, before we answer that question, that reminds me of a man who found a lamp. And in that lamp, he started to rub the lamp. And sure enough, guess what popped out of that lamp? A genie popped out. And then the genie told him, he said, okay, sir, you have 3 wishes. And the man couldn't believe his good fortune, that this was actually happening. And then he thought for a moment. He said, I know what my first wish is going to be. I want a house on Fort Myers Beach. And he wanted it to be 20,000 square feet. That big. And then, boom, next thing you know, poof, he's in his new house. Well, the genie says, okay, you've got 2 more. What is your next wish? The man thought about it for just a moment, and he said, I'd like a black BMW fully loaded. And then guess what? Poof. The guy was suddenly driving in his dream car. And so here he is with his new house on the beach and his new BMW. And he's cruising down the highway. He's cruising down, he's kind of cruising down Estero until the traffic. But so he's cruising down the highway, and then all of a sudden, a commercial comes on the radio. And remember, he's got one more wish. And so he started singing along. And this was the song. Oh, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener. And then poof. Anyway, I say all that to say that there's so many things that we want in life, so many things that we desire. But this is what Solomon wanted. He asked God for wisdom. Lord, give me wisdom. Not just knowledge, not just intelligence, but give me wisdom. And God gave that wisdom to him. And it was through that gift that God was able to bless him in so many different ways. See, if we ask for wisdom, God again, blesses us through that wisdom, blesses our life, blesses those around us, because now we're considering the wisest thing to do in every situation. And again, that's always looking in the shadow of the cross, at the example and the revelation of Jesus Christ. So Solomon was blessed. The rest of his life was blessed, and it changed. It changed his whole life completely. But just to kind of summarize as I close out our time here, the first thing is that true wisdom really only comes from God. Yes, there are a lot of wise people in the world, which, again, it's different than the wisdom of God. Number two, wisdom is not about what we know necessarily, but what we do, how we live our lives on a daily basis. And then finally, number three, living the wise life can bless us in other areas of our lives, just like it did with Solomon. But it all started with asking for wisdom from God, and then God responded. So I conclude with a passage, or a quote rather, from Abraham Lincoln, who said once, "I don't think much of a person who is not wiser today than he was yesterday." So the question that we are asked as I close is, are we wiser today than we were yesterday or the day before? Ask God for wisdom, and you too will be wiser today than you were yesterday. God, give me wisdom. Amen.